Hello. This is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. George Soros is at his best when a people and a nation are at their worst. George Soros has perfected the ability to profit at the free-fall decline of a people and a nation. This is his one and only business model, and he does it over and over again. And it seems as though whenever there is an economic crash happening or some other calamity in whatever part of the world, George Soros is always there to cash in. He is always the right man in the right place with his bucket out, collecting all of the money that is falling out of the sky, collecting all of the savings, the retirements, the pensions, the earnings, and the investments of the working people of that nation. And the story we are led to believe is that this man is so brilliant that he built an empire from a single line of credit, from a single credit card line of credit. It is a rags to riches story where he was some sort of a day trader and he got so good at it that he was able to take on and take down entire economies of nations. He has not invented any product. He has not streamlined any service. He has not made our lives better in any way. He only knows how to profit at the expense of the people of the world. And the question is he that brilliant, or does he have friends in high places? Does he have friends in the institutions that run the world? Is the fix in? Well, let's look at the Asian tiger nations of the 1990s. In the early 1990s, there were a set of nations in Asia referred to as the Asian tiger nations that were experiencing unprecedented growth. They were climbing out of third world living conditions into a healthy first world status. And the people of the world were celebrating this achievement. The people of the world were rooting for these countries. But then out of nowhere, an economic crash of incredible proportions happened directly to these countries. And what do you know? George Soros is there cashing in on all of the investments, retirements, savings, and pensions of these people. Or how about later in that same decade in Yugoslavia? In Yugoslavia, where a sovereign nation at peace was burnt to the ground by invading NATO armies for reasons we still do not understand. But for some reason, while the nation was burnt to a crisp, all of the factories and industries were left untouched so that Soros could buy up the industry of an entire nation for nickels. It happens over and over again, and every time the press steps in with foggy and gray explanations and defenses of George Soros, they can never seem to explain the uncanny ability of this man. But there is one person who has a picture-perfect focus of George Soros and his schemes, and that man is Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad. And I will quote Mahathir Mohamad now. Quote, "For them, wealth must come from impoverishing others, from taking what others have in order to enrich themselves. Their weapon is their wealth against the poverty of others." Unquote. That is Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad referring to George Soros and his currency schemes. And now Soros has directed his focus at the state of Texas by investing directly into the political campaigns of our Texas representatives. And this man who does not live in Texas, who may never have even stepped foot in Texas, is deciding the fate of our local elections. Our local elections in Harris and Fort Bend County are largely being dictated by this international financier. The premise of this show since inception has been that the Democrat Party is our party. It is the party of the people of Texas. It was our party when I was a child. It fought for the working man. But now it increasingly seems to have been purchased by the European billionaire class and directly by George Soros. And further, the premise of this show is that local officials have an obligation and a duty to the people of Texas first, regardless of any national affiliations of the Democrat National Party or any agenda of the Democrat National Party. Regardless of the national agenda of the Democrat Party, our local officials are the last line of defense for the citizenry. They are our neighbors. Their children attend our schools. We see them at the grocery store. And as such, their duty is to us first and foremost. So when our local officials align with an agenda that is not in our interest, it is the greatest betrayal. It is an even greater betrayal than a statewide or a national representative. If a national figure goes against our interest, that is one thing. But when our local citizens, our local residents do it, it's a whole nother thing. And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we will give you all of the ideas, the content, the information that you need to take back your city, your country, your state, the great state of Texas, your state, your country, and our world. But there's an obligation that comes with this show, and the obligation is on you to get involved today because this is happening on our watch. Get involved and take a stake in your local affairs. Start attending your county commissioners' courts. Start attending your city councils. Start attending your school board meetings. And start calling your representatives, both Democrat and Republican, and letting them know what matters most to you. And on today's show, we have a very interesting guest. We should have two guests. I'm not sure if the phone lines are working. I hope they are. But in the studio, we have Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg. Kim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. Well, I'm very glad to have you here. I want to check to see. I should have another person. Nope, the phone line seems to be down. I'm going to try to have him call in on another number. I just hang up on him. Hopefully he'll call back. 1 second there, Kim. We'll text him real quick. Apologize for that. So it's very good to see you.
You too.
So I sort of gave. I think that you're largely, you are familiar with what I just described to some extent. And so my first question for you is, what is your opinion of my opening monologue? And in general, tell me what you. Well, let's just start with that. Do you have an opinion on what I just discussed?
So, Chris, you're bringing light to a subject that most people don't think about, and that is how we're locally affected by people who impact the world economy. George Soros is one of them. And so whether his investments are the profit of the poverty of others, I'm not sure. But I can tell you he's made a tremendous impact in local politics here in Texas and in other urban areas around the country that people are seeing change. And that effect has been brought about by his political, not just influence, but money in local district attorney races. The district attorney's office is the front door of the criminal justice system. We're the linchpin. We decide who gets charged, what they get charged with, what we're going to do with those cases. And so the key to change in the criminal justice system, at least according to George Soros and his allies, was not in Congress or the state legislatures or even in police departments. He and his believers felt like the district attorney's races were the easiest, cheapest, and fastest way to change the criminal justice system. And it's not that the justice system didn't need improving. It does, and it did. And there were and are many things wrong with it. But what we see from George Soros' side is a push to eliminate personal accountability and to move money out of traditional public safety infrastructure, police, courts, prosecutors, and toward special interests, some reimagined criminal justice system that isn't well defined, that we haven't seen programs come from it that really work. And so we see a huge amount of money influencing DA's races now with candidates who don't come with qualifications necessarily or experience, but are allied to these ideas of reimagining criminal justice. And, the police and traditional lawyers like myself look at each other and think, well, who are they going to call when it all goes bad? If you're reimagining it, who are we going to call when somebody's breaking in our house or raping our daughter or taking our kids out of the front yard? So this concept of reimagination of the system is really not practical. There's not been any programs that can be pointed to that work, but there's a lot that have been funded that don't work. And one thing that George Soros has been really big on is DAs who want, quote, bail reform. They want people out on bail. There's this concept that if we jail people, we're caging them. And that if we go after the folks who committed crimes, if we happen to find that more Anglos or more Latinos or more blacks committed a crime, that somehow we're racist and not simply following the evidence. So once you inject racism into the conversation about what should we do about public safety and criminal justice, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. And it upsets people. Black America feels like they've not been treated the same or right by the justice system. So it plays into this victimization of a community. But what they get with bail reform are really dangerous people living next to other poor people who then are victimized by these violent offenders on bail. And while the concept is, it sounds good that people are innocent until proven guilty, that's all true. But the concept of bail was designed to prevent the community from being hurt after somebody was caught for a crime until he could be tried. He was either in jail or on bail with conditions. And this whole notion of bail reform is all about letting people out. Then there's other reforms that the Soros DAs are encouraged to adopt. One is stating that we will not prosecute entire classes of crime. So certain prosecutors have been elected in cities like Philadelphia and Baltimore and Boston. These are people I know. They're good folks, but they came in with an agenda that basically was Soros-driven and laid down black and white rules for the police about what the DA would and would not accept in terms of charges against people. And so when you tell police, well, we've got law A, folks can't resist arrest, but if they do resist your arrest, we're not going to take your charges. And so this has really deflated police. They feel like when the DA won't take a class of charges that we're not following the law, and in truth, we're not. So there's different agendas being pushed to local DAs who are supported by George Soros's money in elections. He's been very effective at electing, quote, progressive prosecutors. I was known as one. I'm the only prosecutor in America that's both been the recipient of George Soros money and been the target of George Soros money. And I can tell you how that came about. It's much like developers acquiring real estate. I won my Democratic primary in 2016 with no help. In fact, I won against a George Soros-funded candidate. After I won, I began leading in the polls in the summer against a Republican incumbent, and Soros showed up, and they sent money, about $600,000 for TV ads. There was no discussion. There was no quid pro quo. I received the money. I spent it on TV. I won. Whether I would have won without the money, we'll never know, but I was leading in the polls when they came to support me. Ever since that election, George Soros has put up money to fund opponents against me, both in my primary and even in general elections. And that's because I was not the same type of progressive I think that they were looking for. I was a reform DA. I have a lot of experience in the system. I wanted to change the way we handled drugs and human trafficking, mental health. But I was always very traditional about violent crime. We should prosecute people, we should hold them accountable, and we should protect others from dangerous folks. This is not something that Soros's DAs talk about, but it's pushed to us or to them that even if you're prosecuting violent people, they should be out on bond. They should not receive long prison sentences. Really, they're not accountable if they're poor, if they're underserved, if they're under. There's just a real disparity and judgment that comes with the acceptance of George Soros money that was not clear to me, but has been made clear through their support for opponents who embrace far left approaches to criminal justice.
So my first, I would say that my premise is this, is that George Soros is not a dumb man. And so what we do is we don't like to judge. And so we say, he's just mistaken with these. I mean, you just sat there and described lawlessness, right? And what is lawlessness? It's
lack of accountability, no money for order, undermining the judicial system, undermining the authority of the law by disregarding the law and having the top law enforcement official do it in an official way, telling police we will not prosecute entire classes of crime. I wouldn't do that, and that's why I became a target of the Soros machine. But it's not him, an individual. It's folks who come from different parts of the system, mostly the defender system, but also social workers and researchers, academics, people who do not have actual experience in the justice system. They have classroom experience. And I think they're looking to reimagine criminal justice without understanding operationally how it works. I also don't think they understand human nature. People do bad things.
Okay, and so, my first point is that to the commoner on the street, to the common person on the street, it is pure violence, what they're doing. Okay, yeah, and they weigh down our institutions. Our institutions become lethargic and overburdened. But to the child walking down to the street, to a small person walking down the street, it is a threat. It is violence. And so what I'm saying is that where we sort of attribute just a lack of good judgment on these people, I do not accept that opinion.
I don't think there's any mistake here. I think there is a master plan to change the American justice system by going through prosecutors who you either own or you remove through money in political campaigns at the time of elections. And so after defeating George Soros' candidates 3 different times in different races, they brought in about $4 million into this district attorney's race, my primary, Democratic primary, this year, 2024, and were able to effectively elect an unknown, a prosecutor who worked for me for about 5 years, and he's now the Democratic nominee. And so how was that done? Well, $4 million is a great deal of money to get somebody else's name out there and to trash my name or the incumbent's name through advertising. And so that's what was done. It suppresses the incumbent's vote. It encourages the newcomer's vote. And they were very effective in their use of that money, both through TV and mail. And in Texas, our legislators had a kind of a revulsion against George Soros's DAs in other urban areas, and they decided to pass what was called the Rogue Prosecutor Bill. And the Rogue Prosecutor Bill was designed to keep DAs from taking a position contrary to the law of their state. So we had DAs in Dallas and San Antonio, Corpus Christi, Austin, who signed letters saying they would never prosecute certain types of crime. In Texas, it was abortion, and they said they would never prosecute an abortion-related crime. I'm pro-choice. I've been pro-choice all my life, but it defies and it goes against my duty to judge a case before I've applied the law to the facts. My duty is to apply the law to the facts. If it's crime, we take it to a grand jury and they decide if there's probable cause. And so in this instance, you had 5 DAs around the state saying, no matter what? I will never prosecute an abortion case. What this did is divide and cut me off politically, making it look like I would prosecute abortion. Then they sent out mailers saying that I would prosecute the governor's abortion ban. All of this after having been a woman, having been pro-choice, having marched in Washington for my reproductive rights, was a big lie. But you put enough money behind that and you stick it on TV and in people's mailboxes and they believe you. And so I had close friends calling up, Kim, why are you going to enforce the governor's abortion ban? So what they did is they sandwiched me between a rogue prosecutor law and a whole lot of money behind an opponent who was saying, hey, I'm a man, but I'm pro-choice, and I'll certainly never prosecute abortion. So he was able to say as a candidate what I cannot say as a prosecutor. If I say it, I can actually be removed as a matter of law. So I wouldn't go against my oath. I wouldn't say never or always about any crime. It was effectively used against me in politics, and bada boom, bada bang, you got another Democratic nominee. And so that's the Soros methodology for winning an election. You take a very divisive issue that polls really high, you paint your incumbent if you're trying to take somebody out, or you paint your incumbent if you're trying to keep them in as somebody for or against that particular issue. You put a bunch of money behind it and you can win. And that's because in typical DA races, there's no money. We don't give contracts out to engineers or folks who build buildings or highways. We prosecute criminals. So there's no money in criminal justice to speak of in the races. They've always been low dollar races, and $4 million is a good deal of money, even in a county this big. And so I was able to raise just under $1 million, but Soros brought in $4 million, and it was very effective.
So, in short, he misrepresents issues.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's so wrong. There has to be something done about this, because it's so wrong. Because the people are out there, working a 50-hour week, and then they're supposed to know the minutia of all of these in and outs of what.
And they can't.
You're right.
So most people do not understand why judges are letting individuals out on bail. It's part of this Soros progressive agenda that says we don't want to put people in cages. Now, I got to tell you, Chris, I don't want to put people in cages, and I don't. I use the American justice system to bring evidence forth against individuals accused of crimes, and juries and judges either believe it or they don't believe the evidence. But what I won't do is decide ahead of time who we're going to arrest and who we're not going to, who we're going to charge and who we're not going to. And that's really kind of the purpose. They're trying to remove what we knew as a system that kept law and order and replace it with some scheme that we still don't know what it looks like, but it's got people voting against their own interest. If they think the system is racist and against them, they don't understand why then if they vote for the Democratic nominee that their neighborhood is under siege by criminals. Well, it's part of the plan that's been put in place to reimagine our system. Let everybody out, don't go to trial, don't fund the DA, don't fund the police, and just let the neighborhood devolve. What the point of that is, I can't find one because people die in that situation. But there's a lot of money involved. Almost 60% of our tax dollar used to go to public safety right here locally in Houston and Harris County. And now the county spends far less on criminal justice. They've starved the justice system. That's your commissioner's court. And instead they put money into things like, COVID contracts for raising awareness or getting people vaccinated. They've put it into programs that are untested, that don't work out, that are expensive, that are supposed to reimagine the justice system. Example, we have a great crisis intervention team system in our police departments for mental health. Needs to be bigger, but instead of funding it and making it bigger so that you have trained cops answering mental health calls, they created entire new teams in the health department, unconnected to the police departments, who are supposed to go out and answer these mental health calls. this is not safe. It's not working. The results are poor. Very few people are served. And yet more than $10 million has been spent on that program. And now we find that the program that it was based on out of Sonoma was really built up in a way that made it look like they were serving a lot of people, and they may not have been serving any. We've got problems paying the vendors because they didn't submit timesheets that are clear about where they work. Did they work in Sonoma Valley or did they work here in Houston with this reimagined criminal justice violence interruption program or whatever they're calling it? So it's confusing to people. It sounds good, and yet the programs don't work. They cost a whole lot of money. People from out of state often get that money instead of funding local programs that already exist. So it is the betrayal of your local leadership that funds programs that folks like George Soros are pushing, but they push it through different vendors in other places, and then those folks are brought in as the, quote, experts here to Harris County. I think we know how to run our justice system. I think it just needs to be funded.
So I'm hearing two foundational themes of this left-wing, largely Soros-financed and influenced program. Number one, take common sense out of enforcing laws. Number two, take funding away from essential governmental services and put it into contracts that don't really mean anything and can be steered to friends and family. Do I sum that up right?
You did. You did. That's what I see happening. We are seeing the beast starved and the footprint shrunk against our will. People in Sunnyside are crying for more police coverage and getting less. And you are summarizing it correctly. The police and prosecutors are frustrated because we have laws that will protect people, but our courts have to enforce it, and they have to do it in a timely system. And so we have cases that, serious cases, capital murders, that are 6, 7, 8 years old. They're just sitting in dockets. And many times those individuals accused of those really serious crimes are in the community on bond, committing more crimes. And when they do, often our judiciary re-releases them on yet additional bonds, always low or free, but meant to keep people out of jail while awaiting trial. That endangers the community when it's a violent person.
So you found yourself in the crosshairs of the local of the Democrat Party on two levels. Number one, at the district attorney level, in the fact that you wouldn't go along with this lack of law enforcement or this new vision of law enforcement. That's number one. And number two, at the local level, because you weren't friendly to this fraternity of passing around contracts.
Which led to criminal investigations of public officials and eventually indictments of some of their employees. And those people will stand trial. I think that the prosecution and investigation of local politicos by your local DA puts us in an almost impossible spot. Used to be handled statewide by an office run out of Austin, but after that office prosecuted Governor Perry, he defunded that office. That left local politicians subject only to prosecution by their local DAs. We go to political events at night. We sit at the same tables and eat together. It's extremely uncomfortable, and it's part of the job. I did my job. That definitely put off some of the Democrats in the party. I don't think it put off real people. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you don't want to live next to a murderer on bail. You'd rather not have a registered sex offender, at the end of the block where your child has to walk past to get to school. So regular people really don't want this in their neighborhood, but it takes funding and it takes a loyalty to the rule of law. So you're absolutely right. Where I got off the progressive train was when bail reform went from let's not keep poor people in jail for minor crimes. I agreed with that. But when they moved to violent criminals, let's get everybody out of jail because we don't want anybody in, quote, a cage, that endangered too many people. We saw our murder rate shoot up, and it happened after 2019 was a new wave of judges here in Harris County, and they took a radical approach to bail, let a lot of people out, and as a result, we saw our murder rate go past 650 in the county. We hadn't seen that in 30 years. So 650 people were murdered back in 2021 and 2022, and that was a 30-year high. And to say that it wasn't related to bail reform was literally to just put your hands over your eyes and refuse to look. That's absolutely what helped cause it.
Well, I think it's sort of an evil genius, this plan that they've developed. Again, two-pronged, do not move away from enforcing law, and then at the same time redirect governmental resources to non-essential items and build a more of a crony fraternity around a K Street around every county in America. And I think that's what the point of my opening monologue was, is that, we're feeling this here in America. But again, I opened my monologue talking about the Asian tiger nations. There were 4 countries. Those people were hurt badly. And my argument is that it was a scheme. It wasn't he wasn't some genius investor. No, it was a scheme. And it was a scheme where it was the groups that can move foundational, institutional groups that can move foundations of economies. They did it in Asia. They did it with the UK pound in the British pension system. The British pension system lost their funds to George Soros. In Yugoslavia, I mean, we turned a country over, and Soros was able to just make up billions. So what I'm trying to say is that in one form or another, there is an evil conspiratorial scheme. And I am not going to equate it to happenstance or bad judgment. No, my argument is that it's evil brilliance, and it's purposeful, and it's criminal. But with that being said, I think I have a caller on the line. G2, are you on the line?
I am.
Excellent, very good. G2 calls in. He's from the industrial Midwest, doing a lot of good work up there. And I'd like to introduce you to Kim Ogg. G2, do you have a question for Kim?
Well, this has been an interesting conversation. When you look at Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, George Gascon in Los Angeles, and then you see this again happening in Houston, and there's a direct correlation. They all come into office and then explain what crimes they'll no longer punish. They push for this bail reform, and then suddenly you see homicides climb. You see violent crime climb. You see shoplifting climb. And it is clear, to your point earlier, that it's not incompetence, it's not happenstance, because it's consistent across multiple jurisdictions where these Soros-backed district attorneys get elected. The question is, why did the people put up with it? I mean, I understand the power of the advertising money, but at some point you would think the people would just stand up and say, we're not going to accept this anymore.
So the people are confused, G2, because they're being told these are traditional democratic values. Our party wouldn't lie to you. We're here to help you. And that used to mean, and it means to most Democrats and Republicans, we have safe streets. We can go to the store without getting robbed. We can run our business without being embezzled. But if there's no accountability in the system and there's free bail for everyone and there's really not enough prosecutors to take cases to court, then you're going to see a lack of accountability. And I think that's wholesale what you're seeing. And meanwhile, the money's being used on other things. Was this a big scheme or conspiracy? I have a real hard time thinking that people can actually get it together to do that worldwide. But I can tell you in the nation what's happened. I was first wave Soros. I was 2015, 2016 when I got the $600,000 in funding. There was no quid pro quo. There was no conversation. There was no screening. They just put it in my account. Now what I saw in 18, 20, 22, and 24 is there were clearly deals that were being made. There were folks who were being supported, but they had either agreed to this agenda of declaring crimes they wouldn't prosecute, pro-bail reform, et cetera, or it was being pushed and they agreed to do it. So whether it was their idea or somebody else's, you saw Rachel Rollins in Boston, you saw Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, you saw Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, George Gascon, first San Francisco, then LA. Kim Foxx in Chicago. These are nice people. I like them all. I know them all. And I will tell you, we just disagree about the cost of public safety and what we have to do to protect people. And several of them are no longer in office. They run into problems with their legislature, with the federal government, with the FBI. And so I stayed in office longer than most. It took 2 full general elections to take me out. I was an independent voice here in local government and still am until December 31st. In other words, just because somebody's a member of my party doesn't mean we won't prosecute them if the evidence is there. And it's a combination of those things. The local pressure that can be applied to district attorneys to get them to back off enforcement of the law and not apply it equally. And there's this national, Goliath out there funding DA's races and putting up opponents to people who dare do so. When they make an example of somebody politically, it's a strong statement to the other elected officials. Get on this train or we'll throw you off. And I think that's where the real danger is that other local people who represent our neighbors and you are the subject of sort of a political, not just sort of, but they're being politically leveraged to vote against their own interests. They think they're being sold good democratic values, and instead they're being sold policies and programs that make our streets far more dangerous than they were. And they don't make sense. You're right. They're not common sense. They defy common sense. So when you try to explain it to the average person, they're just pretty far behind the information 8 ball. They just don't understand. And media has been a big part of that. This push for bail reform, pushing that we keep all these poor people in jail for minor crimes. We haven't done that in 8 years, not since I've been the DA. But what they don't tell you is they're letting a lot of violent people out on very low bonds. And that's what has caused a lot of the violence. So it's doublespeak. It's like right out of 1984. It's propaganda that is well-financed and packaged beautifully. And unfortunately, our mainstream media carries that message to the public, and they're confused. They vote against their own interest.
Well, and the corporate media carries that message without payment even on their regular news cycle. They carry the message voluntarily because they too are ideologues that are aligned with this sort of radical ideology. But I was recently in an urban community that is plagued with drug addiction and violence and homelessness, and what I found there was a resurgence of sort of an intention to change it, an unwillingness to continue living in the conditions they'd been set to, and I struggled to understand how the population, despite, I get what you mean. I mean, the advertising's powerful, it's carefully crafted, and again, it's replicated by the actual reporting that these corporate media outlets do, because they push this propaganda. But at some point, the people must stand up and say, I simply won't accept it anymore.
I think that's where crime victims have a real powerful voice. In the late 80s and 90s, we were subject to a revolving door in the Texas penitentiary system. They would parole very violent people to the urban areas, and we saw record murder rates. Crime victims got sick of it. They got sick of their children, their wives, their husbands being murdered. They got sick of low sentences or sentences that were chopped in half by the penitentiary and let people out really quick. And they did rear up. They went to the legislatures and they got more prisons built and they got more time for people to be serving. And while those sound like draconian measures, for violent individuals, what I can tell you is it worked. We had a period of about 30 years of improved and increased public safety with low murder rates, low crime rates, and you saw it change dramatically here in Harris County in 2019 with this new judiciary. And so I think it's really important that people understand crime is not complex. The issues are simple. They're really just centered around risk and personal freedom. It's balancing of rights, and that's what we do in our system. We employ the Constitution and we balance the individual's rights against the public's right to be safe. And from my perspective, we should always lean toward what makes the public safe. The individual's rights are important, but speedy trials can help that. And yet, we had a commissioner's court that didn't rebuild our courthouse for 5 years after a hurricane. Our office of 900 people was split into 11 buildings. Try managing 900 people in 11 buildings.
Wow.
And 110,000 cases. So it was extremely challenging. We utilized technology. That's how we kept our heads above water. We went from a paper system to a paperless system and scanned 50 million documents. And that's really the only way we kept up through the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey and then the pandemic. So technology got us through, but the crime rate got worse. And as you see now, we've got a mayor who's struggling with funding the police department. We've got an underfunded sheriff's department, underfunded court system. It's shrinking the giant, and it's against the people's will. And yet, if you ask them, do you want more prisons, they'll say no. They think they're supposed to say no. Well, they don't know how many prisons we have. They don't know how many beds we have. They don't know what our population is. So it's a lot of it is how you frame the issue. And, you know, in politics, it's easy to craft messages that spin an issue. And that's what's been done with justice. And it's why people don't know what the truth is anymore. It's not just in criminal justice. It's almost in everything that politics touches.
So
yeah, that is
ahead,
certainly the case. That is certainly the case. But even in the media, say in Philadelphia, when Krasner, I believe, created a significant upsurge in violent crime, eventually it began to show up in letters to the editor and the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think Gascon has faced similar media. It's gotten so tough that their policies have been put into question. And when you enter office and then list publicly the crimes you will no longer prosecute, it just goes to reason that you're going to have significant surges in crime in those areas, which then lead to, of course, other crimes. So
it's also not what was contemplated in the Constitution. We're supposed to be a nation and a system of checks and balances. So if suddenly the judicial branch, which I'm a part of, decides, screw the legislative branch, we're not going to do what they say anymore, it really upsets the checks and balances that our founding fathers put in place to maintain the democracy. So it's a real shortcut to an end game where the money is moved to different interests and we're left on our own to try and deal with human nature, which is not always kind and which exploits vulnerable populations like children, old people, and that's what you're seeing. I mean, we're just not able in law enforcement to keep up, as underfunded as we are, with the crime that's happening in the third most populous county in the country. And so you've got police officers that are disheartened and prosecutors that get up every day and fight the good fight, but they have giant caseloads. We're the least funded office in the top 20 cities in America. And yet we've kept the lid on it. We've prosecuted public corruption, police corruption, and we have treated folks with mental illness and minor crimes much differently because I want them to stay in the workforce and I want those with mental health problems to get treatment. They don't get better in jail. So we've done some very reform-minded improvements in our system in spite of the lack of funding. But where you see the failure is against violent criminals, and that's why your crime rate is staying high.
Well, again, in Philadelphia, they announced that they're not going to enforce most of the gun charges. They stopped doing so, and then suddenly more people are getting shot. And in Harris County, Lena Hidalgo certainly is, I think, ideologically aligned with George Soros. So there's no friction between her and the idea that a prosecutor would follow the patterns set in these other cities.
It's pretty clear from her performances in Commissioner's Court that she's very anti-police, very anti-law enforcement, anti-prosecution, and anti-accountability. You know, most people, when their employees are indicted for public corruption, say something like, you know, we're fully cooperating with the police and prosecutors, we have faith in our employees, and we'll let the system work it out. Instead, Lena Hidalgo got on television with the county seal behind her, endorsed my opponent, and called the prosecution and indictments of her employees political prosecution. There was no consideration for the wrongs that had actually been done, and so I look forward to that case being tried. I've given that case to the Attorney General in the hopes that it will be protected, because the Democratic nominee, should he win, has already stated he thinks these were political prosecutions, never having seen the evidence, accepting the endorsement of Judge Hidalgo on the basis of my prosecution of her employees. So it's a twisted system when she gets a $500 fine for doing that, and you know, unfortunately, Harris County has to reap the bad benefits of contracts that were steered to political friends. That's just not right. It's against the law, and I look for those cases to be successfully prosecuted by the Attorney General after I'm out of office.
You know, Kim,
that will be an interesting outcome. But when you demonstrated an ability or willingness, rather, to prosecute cases without regard necessarily to party loyalty, but rather to loyalty to the law, that got you some national notoriety, even though it brought with it significant local scorn from your party.
Well, principle is an expensive thing.
I'd like to point out also. I'd also like to point out that when you go, when I prepared for this hour, every article out there is turned against you. There is a bias that is for the establishment. You stood up against the establishment, and it's very hard to find anything written without that slant.
It's true. Print media really has been in lockstep with Soros's ideas and Judge Hidalgo's anger at inter-party prosecution. There just can't be politics in criminal justice. It's just not. It's not workable that way. There's no equal justice if some parties are more equal than others, and so the media machine in Houston, especially the Houston Chronicle, has been part and parcel of the far left's manipulation of the facts and truth. And our local Democratic leaders, unfortunately, some of them have been leading the charge. And it came out of Sylvester Turner's office. It came out of Commissioner Rodney Ellis and Lena Hidalgo's offices. And yet they're not generally the sources. There's other people who support them, who receive money from the county, who are close friends with them, political allies in the media that are pushing this message that bail reform is good, criminal accountability is racist, and that our system needs to be reimagined. And I just don't see Houstonians buying that. The fact that they voted somebody else into nomination from my party, that's okay. But I think when they see what he's really for and who's behind him, there will be repercussions in Houston if the Democratic nominee wins. The Republican nominee, Dan Simons, not very well known, not a lot of money behind him, but I can tell you he's a traditionalist and is for the rule of law. And I think that's what Americans are going to have to decide. Are we going to stick with the Constitution and the law as it was contemplated to preserve order, or are we going to, quote, reimagine criminal justice and watch our streets devolve into a bloodbath while we're doing it?
You know, G2, I'm going to cut in here because we're in the last minute. I just want to say, you know, the premise of this show from the beginning has been, and I'm going to repeat myself, that when the party goes against the people, it is the duty and the obligation of the local representatives to stick with the people, regardless of what the national agenda of the party is. And I appreciate what you did, Kim. I mean, I think that what you did was brave. I can't imagine the amount of pressure that you were under. It's extremely rare, and I think that it's a big deal. So I really appreciate it. Do you have any final thing you want to say?
Yeah, I want to thank Houstonians for giving me the opportunity to represent you for the last 8 years. I believe in the rule of law. I believe in my fellow Houstonians and their sense of justice. And don't let anybody push you around out there. It's really important to take an independent stance and to stick with our democracy. We have the greatest country. I love Texas, and Houston is my hometown. So we can be much safer. We can actually be the safest city in America. Don't believe what you're reading about our justice system and the crime rate dropping. I'm telling you, it's as high as it's been when it comes to violent crime. It's as high as it's been in 30 years. So we have a lot of work to do, and know who you're voting for when it comes to judicial selections. Don't vote just by party. Understand who's running and what you're voting for. And I just want to thank you, Chris, for having me on. Appreciate it.
Great. I enjoyed it. It was great. And this is Chris I want to thank Kim. I want to thank G2. And this is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. Check in with you on Saturday. Have a good day.